let's talk about the one resource that truly powers civilization. It sustains every city, it feeds every single person on Earth. Without it, our modern world would literally collapse in a matter of days. And no, it's not oil, it's water. Yeah, our entire civilization is built on it, but that very foundation is starting to crack. All over the world, the wells that have sustained communities for generations, they're starting to run dry. You know, when you see those pictures of Earth from space, you see this beautiful blue planet. But that image creates an illusion of abundance. The reality is, 97% of that water is salt water, and most of what's left is locked away, frozen solid in ice caps and glaciers. So what does that leave us? This. Less than 1% of all the water on our planet is actually accessible fresh water. Think about that. That single tiny fraction is what 8 billion people depend on for survival. And our demand for that 1% is just accelerating. I mean, over the last century, it has absolutely exploded. We're talking a 6-fold increase. The gap between what we have and what we need is getting wider every single day. So where does the water we can actually use come from? And maybe more importantly, where is it all going? Well, the answer to both lies hidden right beneath our feet. You see, most of the world's accessible fresh water isn't in rivers or lakes. It's stored in these vast underground geological formations called aquifers. They're basically our planet's water savings account, built up over thousands and thousands of years. And we are draining those accounts at a truly alarming rate. We're pumping water out far faster than rainfall could ever hope to replenish it. In places like the American Great Plains and northern India, the ground is literally running out of water. And here's the permanent danger. We're not just using a resource, we're destroying the container. When you drain an aquifer too much, the ground compacts and the aquifer itself collapses. Its ability to store water in the future is lost forever. We aren't just emptying the tank, we're breaking it. So what's driving this huge demand? Well, the single biggest consumer, and it's not even close, is agriculture. It accounts for about 70% of all freshwater use, thanks to thirsty crops and the massive amounts of grain needed for livestock. The water embedded in our food and our clothing is just staggering. This is the hidden water footprint of your life. As if all that wasn't enough pressure, now we have to add climate change to the equation. And this isn't just about things getting warmer, it's about a fundamental disruption to the entire global water system. For all of human history, civilizations were built on predictable water cycles. You knew when the rains would come, when the snow would melt. That ancient predictability is breaking down. We are entering an era of, well, hydrological chaos, swinging violently between brutal droughts and devastating floods. The reliable rhythm of water has been replaced by extremes. A key part of that old predictable system was the mountain glaciers. They act as nature's water towers, storing winter snow and then releasing it slowly as meltwater during the dry summer months, feeding the great rivers of the world. And those water towers are melting fast. This creates a really dangerous illusion of abundance, a temporary surge of water in the rivers. But it's a false security. It's like liquidating a savings account. You get a temporary rush of cash, but you lose your long-term capital forever. So the crucial question then is this: what happens when the account is finally empty? Nearly 2 billion people in Asia depend on rivers fed by the Himalayan glaciers. The consequences of them disappearing are almost unimaginable. So this combination of rising demand, a dwindling supply, and climate chaos, it's creating intense geopolitical pressure. And around the world, that pressure is starting to fracture international relations, creating brand new fault lines. Just take the Nile River. It's a textbook example of what happens when the needs of nations collide over a shared, finite resource. Here's the situation. Ethiopia, where most of the Nile's water originates, is building a massive dam for electricity and development. For Egypt, downstream, which depends on the Nile for almost all of its water, this is seen as an existential threat. And what's key here is that there aren't villains and heroes. These are legitimate national needs in direct competition. And this dynamic isn't unique to the Nile. Half a world away, a similar story is unfolding along the Mekong River, but this time with an even more profound power imbalance. China controls the headwaters and has built a series of huge dams. By controlling the flow, it effectively controls the lifeline for 60 million people downstream. Their food security, their livelihoods, are now subject to decisions made hundreds of miles away in another country. And this isn't just about distant rivers. Major global cities are already reaching the brink. The term day zero, the day the taps get shut off, is no longer hypothetical. It has been a terrifyingly close reality for millions in Cape Town, Chennai, and Sao Paulo. Now, let's be clear about something. History shows that nations rarely declare war explicitly over water. Instead, water acts as a silent threat multiplier. It aggravates existing tensions. But when food runs out, when economies falter, when the fundamental survival of a nation is perceived to be at stake, that is when water absolutely becomes a fault line for conflict. And that leaves us with the central challenge. We are all downstream in a globally connected system. Faced with this growing crisis, the path forward forks. Can cooperation through diplomacy and technology prevail over a zero-sum competition? Or will water, the very source of life, become the trigger for conflicts that define and destabilize the 21st century? That is the question we must now answer. You know, the most fundamental resource on our planet is, well, it's becoming a tool of power. And look, we're not just talking about environmental challenges here. We are talking about the geopolitics of thirst, and how that struggle for water is quietly but dramatically reshaping our world. Okay, so it all starts with a really simple, unchangeable fact of geography. And it's this: rivers don't respect the lines we draw on our maps. They just don't. Think about it. The Nile serves 11 nations, the Danube 10, the Ganges 4. These very systems that give us life are, by their very nature, shared. And this simple fact, it creates an inescapable dynamic of power, a fundamental inequality that's just baked right into the map of the world, because in almost every single one of those cases, someone lives upstream. And that single reality, the fact that one nation has control of the tap before the water ever reaches its neighbor, well, that is the foundation for the entire geopolitics of thirst. Alright, so this brings us to our first big idea, looking at water not just as something we need to live, but as a real instrument of national power, as strategic leverage. This quote from a Turkish official is, well, it's incredibly revealing. It just reframes the entire issue with such blunt clarity. Water from Turkish rivers belongs to Turkey, just as oil from Iraqi wells belongs to Iraq. Whoa, suddenly it's not about a shared resource, is it? It's about a sovereign asset. If you control the headwaters, you hold immense power over your downstream neighbors, in this case, Syria and Iraq. And this control is being put into practice on a scale that is just unprecedented. I mean, get this. China has built more than half of the entire world's large dams. A lot of those are on rivers that are the absolute lifeblood for countries in South and Southeast Asia. So you have to understand, these aren't just for generating power. They are powerful statements of control. There's actually a specific term for this whole dynamic. It's called Hydra Hegemony, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's when one nation's upstream position, combined with its superior infrastructure, dams and reservoirs, gives it decisive power over the country's downstream. It's a kind of influence that's always there, even if no one ever says a word about it. But look, this power dynamic, it isn't just about dams and rivers. It's much more subtle than that. In fact, it's hidden in the food you eat. It's a concept called virtual water. Think about it. When a country that's short on water imports a ton of wheat, it's not just importing food, it's importing the thousands of gallons of water it took to grow that wheat. And that creates this huge global web of interdependence, where a drought halfway across the world can literally cause food prices to go up right in your local supermarket. So, okay, what happens when this scarcity hits regions that are already fragile? Well, this is where water stress becomes what security experts call a threat multiplier. It's a fantastic term. It basically means it's something that takes a bad situation and makes it catastrophically worse. Syria is just a tragic, real-world case study of this. Starting around 2006, the country was hit by the worst drought in its modern history. And this wasn't some slow decline, no. Within just a few short years, the nation's entire agricultural heartland just utterly collapsed. The human cost was staggering, and it's so important to get the timeline right here. Before a single shot was fired in the Civil War, something like 1.5 million people, mostly farmers and their families, were forced off their land. They had to migrate to cities that were frankly already straining at the seams. So the crucial point here, and this is really important, is that the drought didn't cause the Syrian war. Of course not. That conflict had deep, complex political and social roots. But what the water crisis did, was act as a powerful accelerant. It basically poured gasoline on an already smoldering fire. It created massive unemployment, fierce competition for resources, and deep social unrest right in the heart of the cities. And from this, you can see a clear chain reaction emerge, a kind of terrible domino effect. It starts with the water stress, the drought. That leads to a rural collapse, right? Agriculture fails. That triggers this mass migration into the cities, which just can't handle the influx. And all of that strain, it just fuels social unrest. And it amplifies every single pre-existing tension that was already bubbling under the surface. Okay, so all this talk of tension, instability, and strategic leverage, it naturally leads to one big question. But the answer, when you actually look at the history, is probably not what you're expecting. The big one. Will there be wars over water? I mean, for decades, we've seen headlines predicting exactly that. But is that what's really on the horizon? Just look at this. When researchers actually track all the interactions that happen over shared water basins, they find something pretty remarkable. It turns out that for every single instance of violent conflict, there are thousands of examples of cooperation. We're talking about treaties, joint management plans, data sharing agreements. Overt, all-out war fought primarily over water is actually incredibly rare in human history. And here is probably the ultimate example, the Indus Water Treaty. This thing governs water sharing between India and Pakistan, two nuclear-armed rivals, and it is held firm through 3 full-scale wars between them. So why? It's because both sides, even in the midst of conflict, recognize that the alternative, a war over water, is just mutually destructive. Nobody wins that. So the takeaway here isn't that water isn't a security threat, it absolutely is. The point is that the threat just looks different than we imagine. We should probably be less concerned about one single dramatic water war, and far more concerned about a future of 1,000 simmering crises. Things like state fragility, forced migration, and constant grinding diplomatic tension. It's a slow emergency. But this future isn't inevitable. It really isn't. There are clear pathways to a more secure water future. Now, none of them are simple and none of them are easy, but let's take a look at what's actually possible. The good news is we have a whole toolkit of solutions. Technologically, things like desalination are getting more and more efficient. In agriculture, which is where most of our fresh water goes, precision irrigation can slash consumption. Better infrastructure can stop the massive losses we see from simple leaks. And good governance, treaties and data sharing can build trust. The solutions are there. But yeah, each one comes with its own major challenges. Unsurprisingly, none of this comes cheap. Not at all. The price tag for achieving global water security is estimated to be in the hundreds of billions of dollars every single year. It's a truly staggering figure. But here's the most crucial point about the money. As expensive as taking action is, the cost of inaction is just astronomically higher. I mean, we're talking about failed agriculture, economic collapse, huge displaced populations, and widespread regional instability. So yeah, water security is expensive, but water insecurity, that's a price that no society can afford to pay. And this brings us to the ultimate truth of our water future. We can have all the amazing technology and all the money in the world, but neither one is enough on its own. The core challenge, the one single thing that will determine success or failure, is cooperation. You see, water forces us to recognize just how interdependent we all are. You simply can't secure your half of a river. It doesn't work that way. And in the end, we know there are no winners in a water war. So the real question that's going to define this century, it isn't about technology and it isn't about money, it's about us. Can we be wise enough to share the one thing that we all absolutely need to survive?